Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com as well as the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. Check us out on patreon.com/Sonic Cinema as well. Recently, I've taken to doing little mini reviews or mini blurbs on the films and TV shows that I have been watching in this time of social distancing, where I've basically been staying home as much as I can unless absolutely needed. And that's one of the things that you can check out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. I am pleased to be joined by Timothy J. Cox. He's been on the podcast before. We've discussed acting. We've discussed his work. We've discussed various films. And we are going to... He actually came to me with this idea for an episode of the podcast, and it's a fantastic idea. Last week, from the time that we are recording this, was Jack Nicholson's 83rd birthday, and Timothy thought it would be great to have a discussion on Nicholson's career, and I'm certainly glad to do that. Timothy, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be back.
The thing about Nicholson, and I actually took the opportunity to check out a couple movies I hadn't seen of his for the first time this weekend, and then this morning I actually rewatched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest for the first time in a few years to prepare for this podcast. When did you first become familiar with Nicholson as an actor?
I think, when I was growing up as a kid, I was always aware of Nicholson because he was just so unique. But probably the movie that, when I was really young, that sent him, for me, into iconic status was probably Batman.
Yeah.
Because... when that movie came out, growing up in Wilmington, Delaware, I think friends and I, when the movie opened, I think we saw it 5 times in one day. And that was the days when, I think it was like $1.50 or $2 to go to a movie. But, and you just couldn't take your eyes off him. He was just so unique. And of course, I think I had seen The Shining and Terms of Endearment and movies like that. But Going South and then I think it was after Batman that I just became a huge, huge fan. And then, of course, just going back, going to video stores and just starting really at the beginning of his career, going into the 60s and just watching this incredible filmography of films that it really, and just looking through his filmography, it's not just like, some actors may have a handful of iconic films and film performances. Him, it's extraordinary in just about every decade, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. He not only has one or two, he may have several iconic film performances and really wonderful films. It really is, I think, just one of the most impressive filmographies of any actor in the business.
Yeah. And it's weird to think it's weird to think he hasn't been acting since 2010. The last film he made was How Do You Know, which was the James L. Brooks film.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think he had just a brief supporting part in the film, and the film, it was one of those films I think that came and went because, and it was charming and pleasant enough. It was good cast like Paul Rudd, Owen Wilson, Reese Witherspoon, Nicholson. It had a good James Earl Brooks, who's had an unbelievable track record, but for whatever reason the movie just didn't hit with audiences. And I think he came out a couple of years ago, and I think he officially retired. And I think it had to do with, just not, memorizing lines and all of that. I mean, it's tough to do that. But, certainly, you would love it if he came back. And I mean, I would love it if he came back in another movie, and I would love it if Gene Hackman came back and made another movie. But like, I just want to see, like a great movie with Robert Duvall, Dustin Hoffman, Gene Hackman, and Nicholson and Michael Caine. I think that would just be, I don't know if it's unlikely that that's going to happen, but a man can dream.
Oh yeah, and the funny thing is, it's like you brought up Hackman, and that's kind of where I was going to go after this, where it's like Nicholson essentially retired in 2010 was his last role. Gene Hackman retired. Sean Connery hasn't made movies since League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, so he's basically retired. And it's weird to think of all of these great iconic actors from that relative era of movie making, the 60s and 70s, who are just not making movies, who are just not acting anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's you still see Donald Sutherland, still Michael Caine, Robert Duvall. I mean, and of course from the female side, you still see Jane Fonda working, and it's I think like for a lot of these actors, I mean, Gene Hackman, on average, in the 1970s and 80s, would average about 4 or 5 movies a year.
Oh, yeah.
And it probably takes a toll, I would imagine, after a while. And, and it just gets exhausting, too. I think the way movies are made is different. I think a lot of the movies that we're going to talk about that Nicholson made in the 70s, they couldn't be made today. Yeah. The way, Bob Rafelson and Mike Nichols made them back in the 70s were just, it was just a different time.
Oh, no, that's absolutely right. And the thing is, it's like not only are movies made differently, but like it's hard to think of them. It's hard to think of like what type of movies Nicholson and Hackman and Connery would find themselves in nowadays. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it really is. On the one hand, it's disappointing that these great titans have, hung it up, and it's completely understandable, the idea of, being able to memorize lines and all of that being a big reason that Nicholson has hung it up. But also, it's like, it's disappointing, but at the same time, it's also unfortunately understandable given the way, the types of films that are typically made nowadays.
Yeah.
Back then.
Well, you look at a movie like 5 Easy Pieces that came out, that was really like his first big starring vehicle after Easy Rider. Yeah. That movie, I don't think that movie could be made today. I don't think a producer would take a chance on it, as brilliant a film as it was, because it's a very quiet, thoughtful, about, I guess what people would try to think it as an independent film. Like it wouldn't, a producer may not look at it as or a studio may not look at it as a big moneymaker like a Marvel or the Mission Impossible series or things like that. Same thing with, a movie like King of Marvin Gardens or Last Detail or, or even Cuckoo's Nest, maybe, for that matter. But, well, and now they're remaking a lot of stuff. Like I know they're looking at remaking, or I don't know if they're looking at remaking The Shining. Actually, I thought I heard that they're actually looking at trying to make a stage play version of The Shining. I don't know if that's gonna happen now, but
Well, I mean, with The Shining, you had Doctor Sleep last year, and then I think they are doing like a prequel series of Look for HBO Max. And it's like, I'm not sure if I need the prequel series. I actually really like Doctor Sleep. I thought they did a good job of making it as very... I thought they did a really good job of making a pretty decent sequel to a movie that I absolutely adore.
Right.
But people think about the idea of somebody redoing Cuckoos. Except for the stage, but
and the thing is, a movie like Doctor Sleep, like it did okay financially, and that's the thing that pundits are looking at. Well,
Yeah.
it's a good movie, but how did it do financially? And that's that's
Yeah.
just the nature of where business is these days. I mean, um, like a lot of it's just the way the business is now.
Hmm. So I think my first real introduction to Nicholson was Batman as well. He played the Joker. Was right at that age. I was 11, going on 12 when Batman came out. So I mean, it was a big movie for me to watch, and like a lot of people, I was just really transfixed by Nicholson's performance as the Joker.
Oh
But I
yeah.
also loved what Keaton did as Bruce Wayne and Batman as well.
Absolutely. I mean, and the movie, I mean, kids, people in the 70s talk about, like Star Wars and the experience of that. I think Batman was kind of like that for me and maybe our generation because I mean you remember like when the movie came out it was everywhere, not just the movie
Oh
but
yeah.
like the cards, the posters, the comic books, the toys and all of that. I mean
Mm-hmm.
it was huge. I remember being the Joker for Halloween when the movie came out. I mean I remember going to like a Salvation Army and I said to Mom, I said I need an orange silk dress shirt because I gotta look like Jack's Joker, And she was like, I don't, I mean, so I think we ended up finding like a really sleek women's orange blouse,
Yeah.
and it worked.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I mean, and that's the thing is by that time he had already been a legend.
Mm-hmm.
Because of just the movies and just the iconic status. I mean, he is one actor. If you're talking movies, all you have to do is say Jack,
Yeah.
and everyone knows exactly who you're talking about. I mean it's immortality.
Mm-hmm.
Jack, the man with the grin and the sunglasses. I mean,
Yeah.
and the amazing thing is that if I mean, I've seen he's has 79, 80 film appearances in movies and TV shows, and he started in 1958. I think,
Mm-hmm.
like, if you look at a lot of his early film work, like in Roger Corman stuff, like Little Shop of Horrors or Crybaby Killer, or you don't really think that this guy's going to have a great film career
Right.
because not that he was terrible, but I think at that time in 1958 in the early part of the 60s, we were still, movie stars were still like Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart and
Yeah.
John Wayne. Jack Nicholson didn't look like a movie star. And I guess I think the person that we got, I think two people that need to be thanked. One is Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda, and the other is Rip Torn.
Yeah.
They're the bat, and people don't know the story. I guess Rip Torn was originally cast as George Hansen in Easy Rider, and I think by that time Nicholson was kind of turning away from acting, and I think he was wanting more to be a screenwriter and a director. And Rip Torn was cast in the role of the lawyer in Easy Rider, and I guess early into the process, he and Dennis Hopper didn't get along, and Rip Torn either was fired or let go, depending on who you ask.
Right.
And Nicholson was brought in at the last minute to play the role, was memorable, stole every scene that he was in, and got his first Academy Award nomination, and everything took off from there. But by that time, he had already knocked around the business for about 10 years, and
Mm-hmm.
he had appeared in the if you haven't seen The Raven, it's the old horror film. It's him, and it's Vincent Price, Boris Karloff, and Peter Lorre.
Okay.
Now, and it's one of those the Roger Corman, Edgar Allan
Oh
Poe
yeah.
movies,
Yeah.
but it's so funny watching those three actors, and then you throw in Jack Nicholson and what
Mm-hmm.
we know of Nicholson and his his style of acting and all of that. It's I mean Nicholson, we're in tights and stuff like that, and it's 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 wonderful to watch, like of just like Jack and those early films that are just they're just
Right.
fun to watch. They're not great movies, but you just get a kick out of it.
Mm-hmm. I need to check out The Raven actually because of the fact that I am a fan of the Corman Poe adaptations I've seen, and so I'm very curious to see what one with that cast is like, especially that text. I mean that that text is really interesting choice for that collision of actors.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and after The Raven, I mean, he did work regularly, like on television, and
Mm-hmm.
but his you could tell, like, there was an episode of like the Andrew Griffith show that he was on, and he looked very uncomfortable because that his style of acting, and not only him, but like Bruce Dern or Donald Sutherland, Peter Boyle, like the age of like naturalistic, not the non leading man type leads that were coming in the late 60s and all through the 70s. Through the mid 1960s, you could tell that many of them just didn't, it was hard for them to get a foothold in really, really good parts all
Yeah.
through the 60s. And Nicholson, of course, was the same way. But when Easy Rider came along, he just went up by gangbusters, and he just had an unbelievable string of really great early film performances. I mean, of course, Easy Rider,
Mm-hmm.
Five Easy Pieces, Carnal Knowledge. One of my favorite, a really underrated film of his is The King of Marvin Gardens, which he did with Bob Rafelson and Bruce Dern, where Nicholson plays this very shy, timid brother, and Bruce Dern plays his brother. Alan Burstyn's in it, and if you get a chance, I'd highly recommend it.
Okay.
It's a small film, and then The Last Detail, which is one of my favorite Nicholson performances, Chinatown, The Cuckoo's Nest, and just, all along there, every one is just boom, 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 cementing
Yeah.
his status as a superstar, but also an exceptional actor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will be I'll go ahead and out myself. I'm not as familiar with most of Nicholson's work in the 70s as I should be. I have seen Chinatown. I have seen Cuckoo's Nest. Like I said, I just watched Cuckoo's Nest again this morning. And then I actually watched, it was on Criterion Channel, so I checked it out. The Passenger, the
Oh, wonderful.
Antonioni film, and it was really, it's interesting to look at something like The Passenger and Cuckoo's Nest, which both came out the same year, and
Yeah,
there's such different, there's different energies coming off of Jack in both of those movies.
yeah,
Like in Passenger, he's in at the beginning of Passenger, if you haven't seen it, he plays a he basically plays a journalist who's gone to a war torn area in Africa, and he's trying to find gorillas to do an interview with, but he can't find any. So he goes back to his hotel, and this businessman that was staying at the hotel, uh, he had talked to, dies, and he takes the opportunity to essentially fake his own death and then take over this guy's life as a businessman, not realizing at the time that his business is arms trafficking. And the film is really fascinating to watch. It's one of the few Antonioni films I've seen. I think the only other seen one of his that I've seen so far is Blow Up,
hmm,
but it's interesting to watch the way it's sort of a film noir, sort of a thriller, but at the same
yeah,
time, it moves at a very deliberate pace. It's not really, and it doesn't have that same energy out of Nicholson that you're used to seeing after Cuckoo's Nest.
right.
And then, I watched Cuckoo's Nest this morning, and almost from the very beginning, there's something different about Nicholson in that movie, in compared to anything prior to that you'd seen. And it's ironically, it's the role that almost sort of defined the rest of his career as this
Yeah,
rascally uh, character that just shakes things up everywhere he goes.
Mm-hmm. No, and it's well, I mean, Cuckoo's Nest, I think, was the culmination of all of those, you know, the character from Carnal Knowledge and Last Detail and Chinatown, and all coming together to make McMurphy. And it no, it's I mean, it's an extraordinary film. And the thing is, Nicholson very smartly, and I mean Milos Forman very smartly, surrounded him with a stellar supporting cast.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
you see young Christopher Lloyd and Danny DeVito and William Redfield. I mean, it's just and it's funny and it's sad and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean every time you watch it, you know, the ending of the film, you always tear up just because. But but now, I mean, and I think, you know, the Cuckoo's Nest role, you know, after Cuckoo's Nest, he kind of slowed down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
He did the Missouri Breaks with, I think the reason to do that was he worked with Brando, and the Missouri Breaks. It's an odd film. I mean, it's a movie that I mean, it's part Western, part mystery, but it's also kind of funny because Brando was so all over the place. If you watch the film, he you know, there's points where he does an Irish accent, and you know, then the next scene the accent is gone, and but the joy in it is just watching two amazing actors. But I would imagine that Arthur Penn had his hands full with Brando.
Oh, yeah.
And then he did a cameo in The Last Tycoon. He directed his first movie. Actually, I don't think Going South was his first film as a director, but I think his first major film. And then he took a year off, and then he came back and did The Shining, which I know Stephen King is not a fan of the casting of Nicholson in the part of Jack Torrance, but
Yeah.
I think it works. I think that's also what made him the iconic, like that just added on to the
Oh, yeah.
the iconic persona, because I mean that bar scene, that laugh. I mean, you know, you go online and it's just, you know, you can see that anytime, anywhere.
Yeah. No, in Jack Torrance, because if you know me at all, you know The Shining is my favorite horror film of all time. And I completely understand. I understand why Stephen King was hesitant about Nicholson being cast, because it's like, oh, you're tipping the hat off that he's going to be kind of nuts.
Yeah.
Going early, but at the same time, the more I watch that film, the more you see that, like, Nicholson, for the film that Kubrick made of that material, it was absolutely the right call to have somebody like Nicholson, because of the fact that you want somebody who is going to be able to snap and believably snap too.
And I think it works too, because you even see in the beginning, you already see the cracks in Nicholson's Jack Torrance, and the Overlook just brings out what's already there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think Stephen King, I think originally, like, he wanted like John Voight or Michael Moriarty, who would have been marvelous. It would have been, I think it would have been a different Jack Torrance, which, I mean, you know, like when Steven Weber did it, the miniseries version, it was very different. But I think a few Nicholson isms, I think, were slipped in, maybe by, you know, Steven Weber, because you gotta tip the hat to the master every once in a while.
Oh yeah. And I mean, there are moments in the Shining. There are so many, like, great moments, like the moment where Wendy comes up to him and he's typing and he gets agitated, and you've seen that deep fake episode, that deep fake video with Jim Carrey reenacting it, and just the way Nicholson hits every beat, and then the scene that I always is both terrifying and just laugh out loud hilarious for Nicholson's work is when he's confronting Wendy's seen his quote unquote work and has the baseball bat, and she's backing up the stairs while he's coming after her.
Yeah.
And he has the line reading of Wendy, darling, light of my life, and it's really darkly funny for me to always listen to those line rings, and it just adds to the tension of the moment.
Well, and the thing about him also is that there are actors that there are some actors who the way that Jack works sometimes, like in this or in like The Witches of Eastwick, where that it's over the top, but it works. It's almost operatic in a way, but it works. That you want that
Yeah.
in this kind of a character. You have. I mean, he goes all out. I mean, there's no. I mean, and I imagine that all of these movies that that he's done, where you have to go to those dark places and over the top places. It has to cost a lot emotionally in time, but it's amazing that what he's able to do with parts like Jack Torrance and The Devil and even The Departed, where there's a little bit of that. It works, and there's not many actors that can do that and still be riveting, still be believable, and still be thoroughly interesting. You really can't take your eyes off him. I mean,
no, and you mentioned Witches of Eastwick, which I just watched a couple months ago.
It's a fun movie.
It's a lot of really fun movie, and I think having somebody like George Miller make that film, like he's sort of like Kubrick in the sense that he's going to make sure that what Nicholson is doing is absolutely what Miller wants him to do. And he's going to maximize Nicholson's strengths in a role like that. And he's such a delight as this roguish, just seducer of these three women in Witches of Eastwick, but you also realize how much of a bastard he is.
Oh yeah,
he's completely believable as a devil in that movie.
When it works, and he's sleek, and I mean, yeah, it just works. I mean, again, it's like there's a persona that that he has, that Clint Eastwood has, that Paul Newman and Brando and De Niro and all those guys, but Jack, what he's able to get away with is extraordinary.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic.
And the thing is interesting after The Shining. He had done the Postman Always Rings Twice remake, which is very, very good. And then he did something really, really unique and interesting. His next couple of movies, he started taking like supporting roles, like Reds. He played Eugene O'Neill. He was excellent as Eugene O'Neill in Reds. Reds is a job to get through, but I mean, it's an extraordinary film. But and then Terms of Endearment, which, as we discussed, the role of Garrett Breedlove is not in the Larry McMurtry novel. James Earl Brooks, who had done the movie Starting Over with Burt Reynolds, which I think is the best film Burt Reynolds ever did, they had a ball working together, and the role of Garrett was written for Burt Reynolds, and Burt Reynolds turned it down to do a leading role in Stroker Ace, which sadly is not a very good film. And Jack Nicholson did the part, won his second Academy Award, and I think he would always send a thank you note to Burt every year. But
and I just watched Terms of Endearment for the first time this weekend. That was the other movie I'd seen for the first time this weekend in preparation for this, other than The Passenger. And the thing that's so great about Nicholson in that movie is the fact that there's genuine sincerity to how he reacts to Shirley MacLaine's character.
Oh, they're wonderful together. I mean, they really are. The chemistry is immediate, and No, I mean, and there's scenes like they really crackle. Like, I mean, I think originally the rights to the book had been bought by actress Jennifer Jones,
Hmm.
and I think the option either they repurchased, like the options either ran out or whatever, and then James Earl Brooks, and then I think originally it was going. I think Sissy Spacek was going to be Emma, and then Officer and a Gentleman had come out, and Urban Cowboy and Deborah Winger had become like
Yeah.
a big name. And I know we all know the stories of how Miss McLean and Miss Winger didn't like one another, but it worked.
Yeah.
It worked. I mean, it's funny. I introduced the movie to my wife maybe about a year or two ago. We're sitting there on the couch watching it, and I'm looking over it at her, and she's not laughing. And we got maybe 45 minutes or an hour, and she just says, and she just didn't care for the movie because, she said Nicholson, I guess, was the highlight, but she's like, but to each one's own, I guess. But
yeah. Well, and the thing that I love, I think one of my favorite things about Nicholson in that is actually at the very, very end of the movie where you have the scene
at the
where,
airport,
at the
yeah.
end, well, not even that, even further than that. I mean, that's a great scene in its own right. But I'm talking about after.
Oh yeah,
at the very, very end, where everybody's gathered. I'm trying to spoil as little of the movie as possible if you haven't
exactly,
seen it.
yeah.
And he basically gets up and he starts interacting with Emma's children and Emma's oldest son, I think. And it's like there's a warmth as well as this rascally energy that comes out of Nicholson in moments
to get his
like
mind
that.
off.
That's just really, it's one of the most special aspects of him as a performer.
Yeah, he and then that brought him right back into the stratosphere. I mean, Prizzi's Honor, which was the last film that he had, that's the last film he made with John Huston. That's a really wonderful film.
It's of all
funny.
of all the John Huston movies I haven't seen, that's the one that I want to see the most. And
it is so well. And the thing is, it's so funny because Nicholson does something extraordinary. He plays he's an idiot, like Charlie. And that's the thing is, like, I think the bit of direction that John Huston gave me, he says, "Remember, Jack is dumb, so speak slow." But that was, and talk about chemistry. Him and Kathleen Turner are wonderful together. The entire cast across the board. You have Robert Loggia, William Hickey, Lee Richardson, the great John Randolph. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful black comedy.
Yeah.
And let's see. Yeah, I
we
mean,
already talked about Witches of Eastwick. It's been ages since I've seen Broadcast News. I don't even remember him being in that.
Yeah, he has a cameo as kind of like a big network news anchor, and he has maybe like one or two scenes. And I mean, just as a favor to James Earl Brooks, but like he makes a very, very nice appearance. Follow that up with Ironweed, which is another wonderful film. Him and Meryl Streep played Depression era, kind of two drunks basically that going through the Depression, based on the novel by William Kennedy, and and if anyone's looking, it has like a early dramatic performance from Nathan Lane and Fred Gwynne. I mean, it's not a movie. I mean, they were both nominated for Academy Awards, richly deserved, of course. But like, it's not a movie that when you're talking about the filmography of Nicholson, it's not a movie that comes up. But it's this broken man who's trying to, a life on the road, and he enjoys being an alcoholic, and he has his pal in Meryl Streep. Now that's one that's highly recommended as well.
Okay, and then we're gonna get into the '90s here. He comes back for a Chinatown sequel, The Two Jakes,
Yeah, that
which I've
that was a
not seen.
it was a very troubled production. It was,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's what I do remember hearing that.
yeah, it was a troubled production. I think he was the director of the film, and he was the star, and it was just and it's when you're making a sequel to a film that is considered by many to be one of the greatest films ever made, one of the
Yeah,
greatest
yeah,
screenplays that Robert Towne ever wrote. Um, that's pretty big shoes to fill,
yeah.
and I think by that time, I think the two Jakes kind of had the same. I don't know. It may have movies had changed by
Hmm.
that time. That I think just audiences didn't go for it. But
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I always read the trivia section on IMDb. It always has interesting little bits about the film. But yeah, and I guess there was a New York Times article, and I guess with about the troubled production. So I might want to get. I'm sure there's a book out there about the making of it as well.
Hmm.
That and then he followed it up with another not so great film called Man Trouble.
Hmm.
That he did that with Ellen Barkin. That the movie just the problem with Man Trouble is that it was the script, the script, and I think Man Trouble features what I think to be is Jack Nicholson's not one of his best performances. Like
Yeah.
I think it's one of his films that you could honestly say that he was over the top and it didn't work.
Yeah.
But he had collaborated again. It was another Bob Rafelson. They had worked together many, many times over the years.
Mm.
But it didn't. Unfortunately, it didn't work with the public.
Yeah. And then that brings us to A Few Good Men, which was another Oscar nomination for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I this is probably The Shining is my favorite horror film of all time, but A Few Good Men is probably my favorite movie that Jack Nicholson is in. So a bit of a story with me and my personal experience with the movie. My parents, my grandfather, and I all went to go see it the day after Christmas in 1992. We loved it. We thought it was fantastic. We talked about it. And it was one of those experiences that really started me on the path of really appreciating film in a different way. When the movie came out on video, I rented it constantly because we loved it so much to the point where I at one point had the "You Can't Handle the Truth" speech memorized verbatim. I couldn't do that now, but the fact of the matter is, it's. I think The Shining is my favorite movie because of what Nicholson brings to it, but A Few Good Men is my favorite movie with him in it. For that reason, other than the fact that it's just a really terrific screenplay by Aaron Sorkin, has got a amazing cast, and it's one of Rob Reiner's best films.
Oh yeah, I mean, it had been a very big success on Broadway as a play first. And I mean, no, I mean, as far as a cast in a movie, this is like, you got the heavy hitters at the time. I mean,
Yeah,
Tom Cruise, Nicholson, Demi Moore, Kevin Pollak, Kevin Bacon, Kiefer Sutherland, and it's just a great, fun, entertaining popcorn film. And of
yeah,
course, the whole point of the movie, or the whole thing that you're waiting for, is that final showdown between these two actors at the top of their game. Great,
mm,
exceptional writing. I don't. It's funny, as an actor, now if I ever see an audition notice for A Few Good Men, there's kind of like a hesitation, because it's kind of like, because you have Tom Cruise and you have Nicholson in your head
yeah,
when you get to that famous speech, because they really did it in such an iconic way that trying to top it would be difficult.
yeah. Absolutely. And if I remember correctly, if I remember reading or hearing correctly, when they were shooting that moment, Nicholson, he when if they had to do that scene over for whatever reason, Nicholson would just do the entire thing.
Oh
It,
yeah,
it wasn't it wasn't a matter of okay, we'll start here. No, I'm going to do the entire thing over again.
yeah.
And it's extraordinary. You know, just watching that energy that you're used to in Nicholson just come out in a very different, very sharp, uh, decisive way that's very different than what we are used to seeing in like Cuckoo's Nest or Batman or The Shining.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think he's in the movie maybe a total, I think of what, 15 minutes,
Yeah, something like that.
and that he comes in the very beginning and then in the end, and your whole time you're waiting for him to come back because you know that there's going to be a showdown
Mm-hmm.
between him and Tom Cruise, and no, it's definitely up there, like with definitely one of the classics. And he followed that up with what I think is one of his most underrated film performances, which is as Jimmy Hoffa in Danny DeVito's Hoffa. It came out the same year.
Yeah.
I remember when the movie came out, there was, I think, local papers that were talking about that the budget was over. It was a heavily over budget movie, and I don't recall that the movie did very well financially, but it's a solid movie. Screenplay by David Mamet. It's got a lot of Mamet favorites in there. The late great Robert Prosky, Armand Assante, J.T. Walsh, of course, young John C. Reilly, and Nicholson. Nicholson is exceptional as Jimmy Hoffa. I mean, he has all of the rhythms and of Hoffa. He certainly has Kevin Anderson, who was Bobby Kennedy. I mean, they had a lot of fireworks in their scenes. I think one of the criticisms of the film also was that it was so profane that in 1992 that movie theaters, not many people were showing it, but
Yeah.
now that's definitely one that if you haven't seen it, that's one worth checking out as well.
Yeah, it's it's one that I still have not had a chance to check out, but I definitely will.
And then he recollaborated with Mike Nichols again. I think of
And
all of
Michelle
the
Pfeiffer.
and Michelle Pfeiffer,
Yeah.
of all of the movies, when you think of the kinds of parts that you would think Jack Nicholson would play, the Wolfman doesn't come to mind, but that's what, I mean, 1994 he did Wolf with Mike
Yeah.
Nichols, Michelle Pfeiffer, Christopher Plummer, James Spader, who I think has the best part in the film. And Richard Jenkins and Kate Nelligan, and it's a fine film.
Yeah.
It's a fine film. I mean, it's kind of it's a fine film. I mean, nothing extraordinary about it, but
Yeah,
like it was.
Yeah, I mean we saw it in theaters. We thought it was okay. It was all right. It was fun watching those actors in that type of movie. It was I wasn't as familiar with Mike Nichols' work as I am now. It's one that I do want to revisit at some point just because of Nichols and Pfeiffer and Nicholson and just how much more all of those people mean to me now as far as having seen more of their work and being more familiar with their work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I remember, thinking it was okay. It wasn't anything, overly. It wasn't anything particularly special about it, though.
Yeah. And then over the next couple of years, like he popped up in a couple of movies that were not big Hollywood films. They were kind of really like intimate films. He collaborated with Sean Penn on two films, in The Crossing Guard and The Pledge, which I think are both excellent films. He recollaborated with Bob Rafelson on Blood and Wine. And really the joy of Blood and Wine is watching him and Michael Caine work together. Well, in Blood and Wine at that time, I think Michael Caine said in his book that he was thinking he had become kind of disenchanted with acting and was thinking of retiring. And I think he had owned a couple of restaurants at the time. He says, "I'm just going to retire from acting and and just run my restaurants." And he got a call one day from Jack Nicholson to play this supporting part in Blood and Wine, and it's an independent film, not a big, and it's a kind of a heist film, and it's young Jennifer Lopez and Stephen Dorff, and it's a really really solid indie effort.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, I've not seen. I don't think I've seen The Crossing Guard. I've always been curious about, but I don't think I've ever seen it. Blood and Wine, and then his
The Pledge
film. Well, and the Pledge I have seen, and yeah, I agree with you. That is a fantastic collaboration between he and Sean Penn.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Blood and Wine, I want to say I believe Blood and Wine I did see. It was interesting. It was okay. And then one of his other movies that year, which you and I talked about sort of in over message, was The Evening Star, which is a sequel to Terms of Endearment. Reunited Nicholson and Shirley MacLaine. It's not as good as the original.
No, Nicholson only appeared in like a brief scene near the end of the film, and it just James Earl Brooks was not. I think it was Robert Harling, I think, who may have did the adaptation, and he may have directed it. Robert Harling, and no, I mean it's got a good cast. Shirley MacLaine is back, Bill Paxton, Juliette Lewis, who plays. Who actually looks a lot like Deborah Winger, Miranda Richardson, Ben Johnson, which was, I believe, his last movie. But for whatever reason, like I think it just came down to the script.
Yeah,
it was all over the place. It didn't have the humor and the heart of the Terms of Endearment. But again, by that time it had probably been about 15 years since Terms. Movies had changed, and audiences just didn't embrace it.
Yeah. So that leads us to both Tim Burton's Mars Attacks, which I am not a terrible fan of, but I certainly appreciate the insanity of Tim Burton having Jack Nicholson play the President of the United States.
Yeah.
That's a fun little conceit for a movie that is completely ridiculous in every way, shape, or form.
Well, I think Tim Burton had done Ed Wood, and I think his follow-up was a movie that Ed Wood probably would have made.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's an okay film. It's not. Nicholson plays two roles in the film. He plays the president, and he plays like another, like a Vegas hotel owner.
Right.
Yeah,
I was trying to think of the other role they played, but
and I mean it's I think it was a lot of fun, but certainly not. Not a movie that's probably going to be discussed in his compared to the other movie that he did that year, which was As Good as It Gets, which nabbed him his third Oscar. And the movie, it's interesting. I think when the movie was in the early stages of development, Kevin Kline, I think, was cast or originally thought to be Melvin, and that it would have been a very, very, very different movie. I mean, it would have been a movie I still would have liked to have seen, but I think recollaborating again with James Earl Brooks, the addition of Helen Hunt and Greg Kinnear, and just it's a funny movie, but it's also it's heartbreaking because whenever I see the ending of the film, I always get this feeling they're not going to make it. It's the same feeling I get whenever I watch The Apartment, which I think there's a lot of similarities between The Apartment and As Good as It Gets, is that people, I think, automatically look to it as a comedy, but they're as comedies, but they're really they're heartbreaking because they're more, I think, true to life than people imagine, than people think.
Yeah, I thought it was a fine film when I saw it in '97. I actually had to look and see because I couldn't remember who he won the Oscar over that year. And because I was curious because to see whether I would actually agree with that assessment or not. And the other nominees were Dustin Hoffman for Wag the Dog, which it's a good performance and a funny movie, but I mean I don't know that with Matt Damon for Good Will Hunting, which was a very good performance. Peter uh, Peter Fonda for Yuli's Gold, which I did think was a really good role,
And Robert Duvall
for The Apostle, which I
yeah.
think I would probably say that probably should have been the win there, Duvall.
Yeah.
But I mean, you it's not a movie where it's like you question why Jack Nicholson won the Oscar for it because of the fact that I mean he was certainly worthy of being in that discussion that year.
Oh, sure. And then, just when you think that Nicholson's climbed the mountain and done everything in movies that he can't, he comes out and breaks your heart and does About Schmidt, which
Yeah.
I think is the last really really great performance. I mean, he's. I mean, I enjoyed him in Anger Management and Something's Got to Give and The Departed and even The Bucket List.
Yeah.
But I think About Schmidt is really, I think, the last because he played a man. One, he played a man his own age, but he played this man with the comb over
Yeah.
and it's a heartbreaking, wonderful Alexander Payne
Yeah.
film, and it's just stellar across the board. And him, Kathy Bates, and Hope Davis, and it emerged. I think it's hard if you were to try to get down five of Nicholson's best performances. It would be hard to do, but I would have to.
Yeah.
I think I would put About Schmidt up there in the top five.
Yeah, I think it would definitely be worthy of the discussion. Certainly, it would probably be mine just by default, just because there are still so many movies of his that I have yet to see yet. But no, I mean, About Schmidt is a fantastic role, and yeah, I mean, I as much as I love his work in The Departed, yeah, I mean, I would say as far as like truly Oscar worthy work, I mean, I would say yeah, About Schmidt was kind of the last hurrah for that. I mean, it's entertaining to watch him and Adam Sandler go at it about management. He does good work and Something's Gotta Give. I mean,
it's charming. It's charming.
List.
Yeah, The Bucket List. I remember when the trailer for Anger Management came out, and I think they had Sandler, and it cut to him making that, and I thought, oh my god, this movie is going to be awesome, just because to see, it's just going to be so much fun, and it's a fun movie. I mean, Sandler at the height of his popularity, and Something's Got to Give. Watching two pros, him and Diane Keaton. I mean, also it features no one cries on film better than Diane Keaton. But no, I mean, and again, the Bucket List, collaborating again with Rob Reiner, just watching again two great actors, him and Morgan Freeman. Not, I mean, a fine film, not a great film, but I think you're watching it mostly for. To watch those two actors together.
Definitely.
But
and then I am a big fan of The Departed. I mean, there are so many really terrific performances in there. Now, I mean, I do think, I think there are at least two or three other performances that are better than Nicholson's in The Departed.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, his role as Frank Costello is just you 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 really do have to see it to just appreciate a, a filmmaker like Scorsese being able to bring something a bit more unusual out of an actor like Keaton or Nicholson, that late in their careers.
Yeah, I was sad to read that. I guess that in The Departed, Nicholson and Ray Winstone, who share a lot of scenes together, didn't get along. I mean, I would imagine. I mean, Ray Winstone doesn't look like a guy that you want to mess around with.
No, not at all.
So, I mean, I would imagine, but I imagine you got two big personalities there that probably just didn't click off camera. But who knows? But no, I mean, you look through that. You look through that filmography. I mean, we didn't. I mean, there's another Mike Nichols film that I enjoy very much called Heartburn. Him and Meryl Streep, first time I think they worked together. And I mean, like, you look through his career, his filmography, and he's always surprising you. There's never. I mean, there are some movies that are better than others, but he's never boring.
No.
I mean, like, even, he did a movie that I imagine not many people have seen. He did a movie in 1975 with Mike Nichols called The Fortune. And it was a film it was him and Warren Beatty and Stockard Channing. And it was kind of like an homage to like screwball comedies like of, Laurel and Hardy or the Marx Brothers or what have you. And it's not a very good movie, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But the energy is still apparent, like the between him and Warren Beatty, and just you can see obviously that their friendship shines through. It's just not a very good movie, unfortunately. But I mean, you just look through all of his, even all of the biker films from the '60s, and he's just. When the day come, I remember my wife a couple of years ago, when on the day that David Bowie died, I woke up in the morning and she said, "Guess who passed away?" And I thought she was gonna say Nicholson, because it's like when the day comes when Jack passes, I think it's gonna be like a week of like mourning, because it's kind of like people who've grown up watching all of his movies and seeing him on award shows, and it's an end of an era. Mm-hmm. I mean, Billy Crystal said, like, he's like Babe Ruth. I mean, there should be a number 3 on the back of his on his back.
Yeah,
and I feel the same way. I mean, he's an actor that I've always admired. There are movies of his that I could watch over and over and over and over again, whether it's Cuckoo's Nest or The Shining or The Last Detail, and so many of his movies are so quotable as well. I mean, like, I remember being in a bar years ago with a guy who he had a couple of too much to drink, and he decided to do a couple of lines from The Last Detail, lines I can't say on your podcast, but I am the blanking Shore Patrol. And for those who know the movie and know the scene know exactly what I'm talking about. And of course, I'm through laughter, I'm trying to get this guy out of the bar before the bartender like beats him. But that's Jack. I mean, that's like he's inspired so many people, like as actors and as writers and directors. I mean, you just I don't know if we're ever going to see another Jack Nicholson come along, like, and it's the same thing. We're not going to see another Martin Scorsese or De Niro or Jane Fonda, or when those are sad as when Joe Clayburgh passed a couple of years ago. It's like, oh, we're never gonna see a Joe Clayburgh again. So. I think it's just these the movies that they made. I mean, we have the movies. That'll be with us forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's one of those filmmakers. He's one of those actors where more than many other actors in his generation, he spans generations. Like,
Oh yeah.
people from multiple generations know him for different reasons in different films, and
Mhm.
that's one of the things that's so great about him, and that's one of the things that why he remains such an icon over the years. And yeah, it's gonna be it's going to be it's going to be a really tragic day when we lose him, because of the fact that it's going to be it's going to be sad. So
But and maybe he'll come out and make. Well, actually, there was a rumor a year ago that he was going to do the movie Tony Erdmann. They were going to do an Americanized version of that Kristen Wiig was going to do, and then I heard Bill Murray's name attached to it, and then I heard Nicholson's name attached to it. And of course, who knows the rumor mill? But if he did come back and make another movie or several movies, I think it would be great. But he might be enjoying retirement too. I mean, we're talking about a guy. He's beyond wealthy. I mean, he's relaxing and enjoying himself. Probably. I mean, but there's a little part of you that wants him to come back and get back on the court again.
yeah. Well, with that said, I think this will be a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Timothy, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Brian. It's always a pleasure to chat movies with you, and we have to do this again. We got to pick another actor.
Yeah. Okay, and then I'll do a conclusion after that, and then I'll keep you posted as far as when I have this ready to post. I'll try to get relatively soon in the next week or so.
Sounds good.
To post, but yeah, it was good to talk to you again. I'm glad you came to me with this idea.
Yeah, I think it's fun, and also,
Yeah.
I mean, for an hour, it gets our mind off what's going on in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, but no, it's always a pleasure to chat with you, Brian, and be safe, and best to Meredith as well.
Okay, you as well. Okay.
Thanks. Take care, buddy.
You too.
Bye.
I'd like to thank Timothy Cox for joining me today and talking about Jack Nicholson. And I do appreciate him for bringing the idea to me. It was great discussion. And that's it for this time for the Sonic Cinema podcast.